I asked my mom that question back then, and my mom said, absolutely.
You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. The dinner table example is exactly what I was thinking of.
What is up, everybody? And welcome back to the Schooling Struggle Podcast. It's our belief that the only guarantee in life is that we're all going to struggle. And how we choose to embrace our struggles is what empowers us to become the best versions of ourselves. Hello, my name is Pete, and unfortunately, not with me this evening is my friend and co-host Todd. So speaking of schooling struggles, I'm going to try to sail this ship without his amazing insight, his incredible humor, and his depth of knowledge on the perspectives that we chat about. But I'm super fired up to engage in a conversation this evening with someone who I regard so highly, and I do not say this lightly. He is the most non-judgmental human being that I've ever met in my entire life. He's also a volunteer firefighter. He's a father of 2 boys. He has a BA in philosophy and a Master of Public Administration, both those degrees coming from the Ohio State University. He also a Master of Divinity from the Princeton Theological Seminary. I'm super fired up to have this conversation with Steve because I've heard his thoughts and perspectives on many of the topics that we're going to touch on tonight. And I think he has some awesome philosophical and tactical shares that we can take and apply to our life to be better versions of ourselves. And regardless of one's faith or belief or anything of that nature, I just think Steve has so much to bring to anyone who has a conversation with him, which is why I asked him to join me tonight. And it is my friend, pastor of Tassville Chapel Mennonite Fellowship, Steve McCloskey. What is up, Steve?
Hey, Pete, thanks so much for having me. I want to give an acknowledgement to all the listeners. Pete has been what I would call a hero of mine since 2017. And I've really enjoyed getting to know Pete in these past 5 years, as well as his family. Many listeners may not get to know him in the dimension that I've gotten to know him, but he's someone I look up to. Jen is a good friend as well, but their family is a true gift to have in my life. So thanks so much for having me.
The topic tonight is extremely relevant to my life at the moment, which is what I try to make all of our topics in our episodes based around. And I asked Steve to come on because I've heard him speak about the dichotomy between some of the topics that we're going to be talking about tonight. And I'm going to take a step back and just kind of share a quick story. My daughter recently started 2nd grade, and we sat down for dinner one night and we were just talking about ways that we can manage being the best versions of ourselves and how we interact with other people. And what I was trying to share with my daughter is that our expectation of her is it's not enough just to be civil or even just to be polite or even just to be nice with the people that are in her orbit, but to be kind. And I was recently listening to a podcast with a CrossFit athlete by the name of Amanda Barnhart. And she was talking about the difference between people that are quote unquote nice or polite or civil versus people who are truly kind. And when I think about kindness, Steve was the first person to come to my mind. And I asked him if he would come on and talk about his perspective on this. And I said, niceness is to kindness as happiness is to joy. Because I think happiness is kind of that surface level, and then joy is kind of that next deeper, more fulfilling approach. And it's the same for me with kind of nice or civil or polite versus kindness. So I'm just going to open it up, Steve, and I want to lead off with your thoughts on this. And we're all trying to be, or at least the listeners of this podcast tend to be people who are striving to be better versions of themselves. And often it's so easy just to be nice or just to be civil or just to be polite. And it's often difficult to be truly empathetic and kind. And I'm just curious to know some of your thoughts initially as we kind of dive into this topic.
Yeah, so I might start with just noticing language itself is dynamic. And so that's part of, I think, the challenge of this is that when we use words like happy or joyful, or when we use words like nice or kind, for one thing, language changes across time. So certain words across time end up meaning something very different within a few generations. And I could point to examples, but I think we could all think of them. With niceness, in the way that we use it, there's often I don't want to say it's necessarily the case that there's shallowness, but relative to kindness, when we talk about kindness, there's a depth that um, it goes beyond mere niceness. And I think the same is true when we're talking about happiness in relationship to joy, whereas joy has some kind of relationship or similarity um, to happiness. We're trying to approximate things and experiences and dispositions that we can have within ourselves and towards others. But um, yeah, in both cases, joy related to happiness and kindness related to niceness. Kindness has um, more than just treating someone in a pleasant way. I think it has a deeper benevolence to it. And even when I use the word benevolence, that word might require some unpacking, but benevolence meaning willing the good, like you will good things for the person. I could say lots of pleasant things to a person that they might already agree with, or it causes us to just avoid conflict if we have to be in each other's presence for some duration of time. But when I'm being genuinely kind and not just trying to avoid conflict, I might be willing to say things and go beyond brief experiences as pleasant as it can be, but actually do what I can to care for the other person.
I love that. I was trying to break this down into terms that a 7-year-old could digest and like apply to her life. It's funny that you mentioned the word thing because I was just going to say nice versus kind. And my wife was like, no, I think nice and kind are the same thing. She's like, I think you should say polite or civil. So for her, that really mattered. And for me, it didn't. Like I can strike a difference or a dichotomy between nice and kind. But my wife, Jen, she's like, I see nice and kind as the same thing, but I see civil or polite as kind of the other end of that. Anyway, so we ended up kind of landing with our daughter on nice people, like you said, are kind of avoiding conflict, but kind people are trying to make the lives of others improved. And I gave an analogy that I actually don't think was all that great, but I'm going to share it anyway. I said, if you're walking down the street and you saw somebody fell and cut their knee, if you say to them, "Hey, are you okay?" and they say, "I think so," and you say, "All right," and you just keep walking. To me, that's nice, or that's civil, or that's polite. But regardless of their answer, if you bend down and help them and offer them a bandage or to clean it up, or you help them up, that's kindness. It's so easy to do the easy thing in life. And I often tell my students, like, be the type of person that's willing to do the hard thing. And being kind is so friggin' hard sometimes because it takes an immense amount of mental energy. It takes time. It takes you giving of yourself and of something that you were planning on doing. You have to kind of give that up in the moment and try to help someone else. That's kind of the schooling struggle piece. And that's why I wanted to bring it on the show tonight.
Yeah, that example, I might think with this person that's maybe scraped their knee and they're on a sidewalk and they're within view of me. As you were sharing that, I thought of kind of these polarities of we would contrast being mean with being nice, but I would say like the depth gets deeper with kindness, and I might contrast kindness with cruelty. Like the poles are a little bit stronger and deeper in the connotation of those words. So someone with a scraped knee on the sidewalk, I could say something nice, which is like, "Are you okay?" in the same way that you're giving that example, but it might be mean to be like, you should have watched where you were walking. Like that's mean, but like
Right.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
cruel,
Totally.
like
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I think dramatizing it helps flesh out like then you could kick the person while they're down, and that's
I just laughed.
that's
That's what I
cruelty.
was thinking. So mean
Yeah,
is hollering at him, and cruelty is kicking them in the injury. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Mean is like insulting them or blaming them for their predicament, but then kindness is going above and beyond just being nice. And it's not that I would rather be nice than mean. Like if my reputation was I mean, incidentally, Pete, in my high school, I was voted nicest guy in my senior class. And I kind of had mixed feelings about
That,
that. Like,
that's the least surprising thing that's ever come out of your mouth.
yeah, but it's like I have to watch my language because I'm a pastor, but we don't think of like if you want a badass reputation, like being voted nice guy is not always a compliment, you know. Uh, but never, reputation aside, I think if we're going to aspire to something, very few of us aspire to simply be nice in life. But kindness has a kind of quality to it that we're getting at in our language that it's like, yeah, I genuinely want from my interactions with people, I want to be kind to them. I want to reproduce goodness and flourishing in the people around me.
Todd has a rule that I'm not allowed to stack questions, so I won't stack questions. I'll ask one at a time. And in your own life, where do you feel is being kind is a challenge for you? Like, what are some areas? And I can give you an example from my life if you'd like while you're thinking on it. And I'm going to. So it's really easy and convenient for me to be, at least by my estimation, very kind to people I know. Like, if one of my friends were to call me up and say, "Hey, I'm not going to make rent this month. Can you help me out?" Like, I wouldn't hesitate. Or, it's 2 a.m. and I'm, intoxicated. I need a ride. Like, I don't think twice. I just go. Like, anything that anybody that I know needs, it's so easy for me to just drop what I'm doing and help. I have a much harder time helping people that I don't know that are not in front of me. So if someone's in front of me, I now, and I've shared this in past episodes, but I now have some sort, they're in my life in some way. I'm looking at them, they're present in my life. It's easier for me to help. But it's like, it's harder for me to say, send money to an organization where I don't know exactly what's going to happen with my money, or a group of people that I've never met, for me to have the same level of kindness as a group of people that I know is really, really challenging for me. So that's just an example of my life. It's easier for me to help someone that's right in front of me, that's now in my life, whether I know them or not, than it is to help someone that might be half a world away, and there's still something that I can do to improve the quality of their life, but my motivation to do so is not nearly as strong.
So I'll just say one thing. When you started that question, I thought you were going to go in a different direction, which was actually less about I thought you were prefacing things like it's easy to be kind to my friends, but what about my enemies or like someone that's really hurt me rather than a stranger? Because I would say for me, it's if I've been hurt by someone, it's easier to be kind to a stranger where I have no history with a person. But if there's this history of bad interactions or I've been in some way scarred by them, yeah. So, but to your question, it's a great question. And I think my job as a pastor becomes relevant because our church email, our general inbox, gets all kinds of requests for money, like from nonprofit organizations or random individuals. And I struggle with to what extent can we help in any given situation because we don't financially provide to everyone who asks. And what criteria do I use for evaluation, or do we use within our congregation? That's one question to ask. Now, let me back off from my
Mm.
church's example, but um, I did a master's program at Ohio State.
You have a degree or diploma from Princeton too, right? Ohio State and
Yeah, I went
Princeton.
to Princeton Theological Seminary, which I did after my time at Ohio State.
Okay,
Um,
sorry.
no, it's fine. But I had a good friend who was he's an ethics professor in the philosophy department at Ohio State. When he did his intro to ethics class, he brought out a lot of different dimensions of what does it mean to be a good person? Like when we talk about the subject of ethics, we're essentially getting at that question. But he framed it towards the end of the course in thinking about our kind of moral or ethical obligations to the reality of poverty. And he ended up creating this vetting process for nonprofit organizations, just evaluating which ones are demonstrably, for one, accomplishing what they're saying they're setting out to do, like where you can kind of vet organizations to make sure they're not just embezzling money, but secondly, is even the nature of their work creating long-term sustainable impact that enriches the recipients on the other side of that organization's work. And so, long story short, it ended up becoming this website that's called the Maximin Perspective. And it helped me on an individual level. I mean, when I was doing my master's degree, I tried to tinker with ways you could go about researching that. Like, what criteria do you use for evaluation? So it helped me understand in my own giving process, like, what would I look for an organization that's doing good work in the long haul. Now, that may be going in a totally different direction, but I'm sympathetic to your question just about the struggle of giving to a stranger. And I try to have practices in my life, like giving blood, where like physiologically I can provide for a stranger. I don't know who the recipient will be, but there's these activities you can engage in where you can have some level of confidence. This is helping someone else, and you're not responsible for what ends up happening on the other side. Like you've done your part in making sure you're doing something trustworthy on your end. Feel free to push back, or
Yeah, so that's a great example. I've never given blood in my life, and if someone in my family needed my blood, I'd lay down on the table in a minute. So that's a great example of where it's a challenge for me, or where a shortcoming of my kindness comes along. Yeah, and I think a question for all of us, for everybody listening, and the two of us is, where, I don't know if drawing the line is the right word to use. Where do we reach, or how far do we reach in certain arenas or areas with our kindness, our empathy? I have literally hundreds of students that I could give my time, my energy, my attention to, and I still wouldn't meet their needs. So, how much of myself and my time, my energy is where I need to be to feel like I'm living my best life, I'm being the best version of me, and I'm living out kindness. I think of like I don't know if this is a great analogy, but like you think of like a pro athlete that's just surrounded, or someone who's popular, who's surrounded by all these people that want autographs, and they sign 102 autographs, and there's still thousands of people waiting for the autograph, and that 103rd person gets cut off, and it's just like at some point we all have that. And yeah, I'm just wondering how you navigate that.
Yeah. So, I mean, question that I get asked, it's hard for me to think about these questions without acknowledging my role as a pastor. So, Jesus gives two commands, like he says, prioritize these things. People ask him, what are the greatest commandments? And he emphasizes loving God and loving your neighbor. Like, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And he doesn't explicitly say love yourself, but self-concern has to be part of that, because if you don't
Yeah.
have if you don't have a good, well-maintained self, then the quality of how you care for others will be diminished. And so it's not wrong to have boundaries. Like when you're talking about maybe a pro athlete who has a thousand people after a game wanting autographs, you cannot sign. The best use of their time is not just going to be signing every whatever. They have a life, and they need to attend to that life. They need to engage in other, like taking care of other relationships. I mean, it's not just even their professional, their status as an athlete that they need to attend to. Like you might think of exercise and practice, whatever. They have nutrition, relationships, I even think of some of your own wisdom that you've shared, 5 pillars of health. Like they got to sleep at some point. So I have to ask myself whether it's finances or nutrition. I'm not the best at any of these things. I don't think there's a simple formula that I could apply. But are you engaged in having a disposition of kindness and generosity towards others? I think having some subset of what you're receiving as income as something that you're also giving out helps to foster a disposition towards a general kindness. Like I even think of your phrase, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So if with your money you have an orientation that moves beyond just your immediate, either your immediate self, your family, and even beyond just your own town. One of the things that I'll comment on this because it's related to the research I did when I was doing my master's in public administration. It's only about 5% of what in the United States we give to charitable organizations ends up going to international organizations. Like that actually ends up going to people who are in some of the most dire situations. You know, you've been to Vietnam, but when we talk about poverty in the United States in general, we mean something that's different than poverty in other parts of the world. You know, there's pronounced socioeconomic difference between people right here in Heartland. Like you'll have mobile homes right next to mansions. And it's kind of unique. You and I have lived in different places. We've seen other parts of the world, but there's a kind of there is a pronounced wealth gap here, but the way it works is different than what I've seen in other parts of the country. Even when you're in what we would call poverty here in Heartland, that's different than poverty in, let's say, the Democratic Republic of the Congo or Vietnam or, you know, other parts of the world.
Yeah, no, I could tell you that I learned when I lived in Vietnam, and that was in 2012, so things might have changed, but the large majority of the people in that country lived on what was the equivalent then of $1 a day. And like the middle class lived in shanties that had tarps and had enough coal in there to heat up their food and had a bed that was not on the dirt, but it was a raised bed, like with a bamboo platform. And if you had that, you had like a 6x6 shanty with a tarp over it that actually held the water out, and you had something to cook in and you had something to sleep on, you were like middle class. Yeah. So no, I hear that. And as I hear you talking about this, I'm thinking about, you're saying like, I'm hearing you say that you can kind of make that decision based on, you know, at least for income, like what you have available to give. And you could translate, or I'm asking you, that also translates to your time and your attention. Like what attention do I have available to give after I square away my self-care? I just like the analogy of a house because without the foundation, there's not a whole lot else you can do to make the house strong and all these things. So are you saying that like our self-care should be the foundation, and then when we have that in a good spot, then we can start to kind of be empathetic or available for other people?
Yeah, I might think of the example of being on an airplane, like a commercial airliner. And you probably already know where I'm going with this, but when the oxygen masks drop down, you're advised to put your own on first, because if you don't, you know, imagine
Right.
you're in this limited oxygen access situation, like you're gonna have impaired judgment, or you might even like faint or pass out while you're trying to help. Let's say you're sitting next to your daughter and you can't get her mask on. You want your mask on first. There's as a general rule that I think is a good guiding principle. You can only care about others if you've cared about yourself first.
So I wasn't planning on going here tonight with this, but this is a question that I've asked many people over the course of my life, and people have asked me, and I don't know if I have a sound answer, but what's your response to this question? Can you love others without loving yourself first? And I've heard every single different style of answer to this question completely across the board. It's really a fascinating question to ask, and I'm curious to know what your thought is on it. Can you love someone else without first loving yourself?
So I think the challenge is the way we use this word love, and what do we mean when we're talking about love? Because there's people who experience a kind of codependency in relationships where they have often it gets characterized as an unhealthy kind of love where there's an attachment to another that they're looking for something out of the other that should exist within the self. My sense is that if we don't love ourselves well, we can't love others well. So I would say some level of self consideration has to precede our ability to care for, or the quality of our care, the quality of our love for others. And I might use the example of just an infant. Like an infant is not in a position to give quality care and love in the same way that, let's say, the infant's mother is in a position to care for that infant. So the infant has to be a recipient of love to then pass along love towards another.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, I remember being a really selfish, self-absorbed, not that I'm not that now, but a really selfish, self-absorbed middle school and high school student. And I was really into what I was into. And I asked my mom that question back then. And my mom said, absolutely. She said, I can love the three of you. I have two brothers. I can love the three of you without loving myself, or I don't need to love myself to love you. My love for you is so profound that regardless of whether I love myself or not, I love you with every aspect of my being. And then I kind of, in my shallow mind at the time, I said, well, if you feel good about the love that you give us and you're getting something from that, you must have some sort of self love because that makes you feel a certain way. So you act on a certain way. Like, for instance, if there was ever food on the table and my mom wanted it, she would always offer it to us first. Like if there's like two pieces of chicken left and she didn't really have any chicken yet. And we would have seconds or thirds before she would even have first. And she'd be like, yep, you take the chicken. And that was just kind of like assumed in our house, is that she would give up whatever for us. And I just thought, well, her giving up the chicken gives something to her as well. The feel good vibe of knowing that you helped your son, get his calories or whatever it is. So I don't know where I stand on that. Is, do you have to love yourself first before you can love someone else? I think for my own life, when we love someone, we get something in return from that. And I think seeking that feel good from that return means that we probably have some sort of self actualization of love there.
Yeah, so that example's a great example, actually, and this is why I was hesitant. Like, I had a moment of hesitation around like this oxygen mask analogy. Like, I see the wisdom in the airplane scenario. Like, you want to put your own mask on first. It's an issue of immediate, urgent survival. But the dinner table example is exactly what I was thinking of because there's plenty of times where I put food on my son's plates before I put food on my own. Like I prioritize making sure they're getting food because, and part of it, and this is, you can even like examine a root system of maybe what might be seen as selfishness, but I don't want them to be irritable. Like I want them to be happy. Like I might be involved in even preparing. Sometimes it's not like everything's done at dinner when we start, and there's like maybe a side dish or something that I'm still preparing, but I'll let them start eating because I know they're going to get hungry soon. I mean, so to your point, like,
Well,
yeah,
well, that and you're modeling too with that. You're getting them fed their physiological needs, but you're modeling putting them before you. But go ahead.
yeah, no, and I think the airplane example is important because it's like such a kind of do or die situation. But when we're talking about just eating dinner, it's less of an emergency status. And so like, I mean, like I
Yeah,
think of
yeah.
Christmas, it's like I'm more excited about what they're going to get for Christmas than anything I could want. Like I genuinely get a kind of gratification out of seeing them excited about a new gift they're receiving at their birthday parties or at on on Christmas over myself. My excitement for them is so interwoven with their own excitement um, that it's almost indistinguishable for me.
Yeah. Huh. So I want to pivot the conversation to kindness being on one end of the continuum and cruelty being on the other end of the continuum. And then we fill in the gap. We go from cruelty to mean to civil to polite to nice to kind. And I just want to pivot the conversation. And what I introduced in the beginning of the show was because I've heard you speak on this, and it was really, really helpful for me. And I just want the listeners to hear from you what I heard. And that was how on one end of the continuum we have joy, and on maybe the far end of that we have misery, or whatever word you want to use. And at some point in between joy and misery is happiness. And I spent my 20s and 30s just like chasing happiness, like what makes me happy in the moment. And I was really excited to travel the world and do all these things and lift weights and feel good about myself, and try to impress people, and because I thought these are the things that made me happy. And the best way that I can describe it, the difference between happiness and joy is, again, we're going to go back to the parenting example, but like being a parent is not easy. Like there's so much strife that goes into being a parent.
Amen.
And I only have
Amen.
one, and I have a rule. I don't talk about the challenges of parenting in front of anyone who has more kids than I do. And that's pretty much everyone that has kids. But I just think that being a parent, it brings so much joy. And I guess we can kind of pivot the conversation from you're just talking about watching your kids open gifts, that what I thought was joy, now that I look in retrospect, was really just happiness. Like I was cool, like I was happy with my life, and I had good friendships, and I dated a girl or two that made me, really happy at the time. But like being in a marriage, or being a parent, or now being 17 years into a career that brings me a high level of what I think is joy, like watching my students transcend from being in one mindset or one aspect or one area in their life, and really seeing a transformation of mind and of body in many of the cases is really, really special for me. So I just want to talk a little bit about the difference between happiness and joy. I don't think we need to dwell too much on the other side of happiness, the misery, but just chasing happiness is cool, but what the difference is between that and joy.
Yeah. So Pete, I'm going to welcome you to even ask me specifically, like if there, because joy is something I reflect on pretty regularly. Like this is something I think we should aspire to. There's a phrase I've held on to in the past year and a half, which is "don't postpone joy," which has been a reminder to me. Just I think we've all, as humanity, been through the past 2 years have been pretty tough. I've had in my own personal life, my family's life, we've had challenges. But I think one of the dimensions that separates joy from happiness, or at least linguistically, when we're talking about joy, we're talking about something with a greater depth and durability than the momentary experience of happiness. Like, and I'm not going to say happiness is a bad thing, or that feeling good, even if it's for a short duration of time, is a bad thing. But joy seems to have a quality that can have a perspective that's able to absorb everything else that happens. So like I experience anger, I experience sadness. These things are real. One of the things that I would actually agree with your co-host Todd, and Todd acknowledged this, that in the space of conversation with you, he's felt freedom to not have to joke all the time. Like he was saying something to the effect of, he feels like showing the side of himself. Actually, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he feels less obligated to say something funny in his interaction with you. I'm someone, I mean, I would say Pete knows this about me. Like, I like to entertain, I like to make people laugh. But there was a point about 2 years ago where I just started tearing up in front of my spiritual director. And I just went ahead and cried. And a spiritual director is kind of like a counselor or a therapist. Um, but he said, "You seem more real in your tears than in your joking or in your sarcasm." Now, he's not trying to squash having a sense of humor, but in allowing myself to release sadness through tears and acknowledge sadness, it made space for a greater depth, not just of calm, but I would say of joy. Like there can be joy on the other side of sorrow, where if you do what you can to repress, ignore, dodge, avoid feelings of sadness or disappointment or whatever it may be that we might kind of categorize as a negative emotion, I think we're kind of numbing ourselves in a way that causes us to be less attuned to where we really are. And joy allows us to have a deep appreciation for life itself, including what might be sour rather than sweet in life.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think about. When I hear joy, you just think about like peaches and rainbows, and you see the word joy hung up a lot around the Christmas holiday, and that everything's great and rosy. But to hear you share what you just shared is you were in the dark depths of sharing whatever it is that you were sharing, and because you kind of surrendered to it and it liberated you, even though you weren't happy at the moment, you were joyful.
Yeah.
So a theme that comes up often on this show and in my life is the quote, "What I want now versus what I want most." And it was Abraham Lincoln who was talking about discipline. But when I share it with my students, I talk about progress. I think when it comes to the joy and the happiness piece, this kind of comes into play because often I believe that what we want now is what's going to bring us happiness in the moment. Right now, I want the ice cream. Right now, I want to play the video games. I have many people in my life that are dealing with all different types of addictions. What I want now is to appease this addiction. But what I want most is not really in line with what I want right now. What I want most is to be joyful and fulfilled and to be strong and to have really positive relationships and all these things. So the easiest way for me to kind of break this down is with fitness, right? Like what I want now is to just chill out and eat pizza and watch movies. But what I want most is to be healthy and strong. Well, the only way I'm going to be healthy and strong is to not do what I want right now and commit to what it is that I want most. And what it is that I want most is going to require me to right now put down the pizza and go out and move my body in some way, shape, or form. And I think when it comes to joy, from what I'm hearing you share this evening, is in order to experience that joy, we have to set aside or have the ability to not do what we want now in an effort to chase what we want most.
I think that's right. I think of a phrase as you were talking about that Abraham Lincoln quote, a phrase that I got actually through financial advice was, "You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want." Like in terms of financial planning. So you could save towards something, but if you're going to try to have everything you want along the way, like, I'm thinking of eventually taking my kids to Universal Studios in Florida and Disney World. Like I could save up for that trip eventually, and I like have in my mind 2 or 3 years from now doing that. We've never been to Disney World together or Universal Studios Florida. But if I just spend money on all sorts of things before that, then it depletes the savings. And I think that principle is true in life. Like we have to have some level of, we have to embrace discomfort for something deeper and more durable in the long run. I think that's true of joy. I think that's true of kindness. Like kindness can be costly in certain ways. Um, I really am saying that to affirm what you're saying, your own observation.
We try to have some tactical pieces that listeners can kind of take away at the end of each episode. And I think, when it comes to living a life where you're trying to experience joy rather than happiness, you're going to have to do what you want most sometimes, even though it might not be what you want right now. I don't ever want to have the tough conversation with my wife, but in order to have a solid marriage with her, those tough conversations need to be had. And I don't ever want to come down hard on my daughter, but in order for her to not burn herself by the wood stove, I have to. And I think a joyful, fulfilled life requires that we do what we want most. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's so easy to buy the $2, $3, $4, $6 latte at Dunkin' or Starbucks each day, but you're never going to go to Disney World if you do that. I'm not talking about you. I'm just saying, generally speaking. And I think fitness is a really, really good example of that. And it's the same with kindness. I think it's really, really easy to be civil in the moment. It's easy to hold a door for somebody, or it's easy to say hi and smile at someone, which is really, really important. But I think to experience that next level, that kindness, that empathy, you're going to have to do stuff that you don't want to do right now in order to make that a part of your life. And it's very, very easy to say and very, very, very challenging to do, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I think it's an intentional decision that goes beyond moment to moment reactivity. Like, I can be nice and just sort of coast through life as a nice person. And I'm not even sure to what extent I'll succeed at being nice, because if I tried to please people, eventually, like, you kind of create challenges for yourself in the long run. But to will the good, like to be benevolent, I think takes reflection on what goodness is. If my youngest son had his way right now, he's 4 years old, I think he would constantly, like, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, have ice cream. Like, it would be ice cream for every meal. And then he would play Nintendo all day. And just giving him what he wants is not, like, with that kind of recipe as a life plan, like, that's not going to be good for him. So to will the good for him, I have to have some kind of reflection on what is good for my son. And then how do I, like, convey that intentionality? How do I reinforce that for him?
We can will the good for ourselves. Like, that's the goal, right? Is like, we might not be parents, but the goal would be, I need to will the good for myself. And in order to do that, I need to decide what these important things are in my life that are going to bring me joy or bring me to a level of kindness that I want to be at. And maybe I sit down and I make a list and I write down everything that I want to improve on or where I want to spend my time or attention. And I start to kind of pick away at them and say, all right, like, between when I wake up and when I go to bed tonight, I am going to do this thing or start this thing. And when you're talking about willing the good on our kids or toward our kids or modeling that for our kids, I think we can also will the good on ourselves. It's so hard, though.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a kind of self-discipline. You know, all the examples. You teach this stuff.
So with that said, I'm so grateful that you were able to share with us some of your wisdom and your thoughts on this stuff.
I'm just going to say thank you so much for having me. It was an honor. And I want to thank Todd. Really appreciate that you guys are doing this. And thank you for letting me be part of the schooling struggle.
But with that said, Steve, I just really, really want to thank you for your time and your perspective on this. It's been awesome to chat with you and to catch up, and I'm super grateful. And for all you listeners out there, we appreciate your ears. We thank you for your time, and we're incredibly grateful for your attention. We are the Schooling Struggle Podcast. Steve McCloskey, Pete Driscoll, we are out.
Thank you.